Hey guys, it's me again, Valhalla, and welcome to my little UMG excursion. The purpose I did this video here is I want to talk with you about some stuff regarding my structure. So we want to figure out why I put my widgets inside the player controller blueprint, and why I'm not placing them inside the HUD or even in the level blueprint or whatever you may think of where you can create your widgets in. I was looking through some other tutorials and I find myself that they are missing some structure, because most of all they only show something like hey, let's create a health bar, take some widget, some blueprint you like, and create them in there, and here is the logic where you can add your current health to the health bar and so on. So in order to know where is the best place for you where you can type your widgets in is, this is depending on what type of game you're creating, but I think most of the games you will create there will be the best place for your widgets inside the player controller. Why is that? Keep in mind, when you're implementing stuff, before you implement anything or any code to your project, you need to know where do you think this code shall be placed. So who owns your code, or who is the responsible handler of this code you are doing? So why I'm not using the HUD? The HUD class is only the representer of your viewport. So that's all it is to your HUD, and the HUD is able to draw primitives on your screen. So primitives are, for example, simple textures or materials and so on. So if you do something like that, for example, you are working with canvas or something else, or even here is a good example for when you can use the HUD class if you want to draw a crosshair. Yeah, that's okay to do that in the HUD. The HUD provides you with a little receive draw HUD event, which means draw the HUD every frame. So without this implementation you wouldn't do anything if there wouldn't be a render scene or draw HUD event. For this purposes you can do work with the HUD. But when I say primitives, primitives are here, for example, the texture of the crosshair, but a widget, for example, is not a primitive anymore, because a widget is some advanced object which has inner logic or advanced inner logic, and I don't think it could fit here inside the HUD. So the HUD should only do some easy stuff. Some of you came to the conclusion that you create widgets inside the HUD. Maybe because, okay, it's a UI element, this should contain to the HUD. Okay? But is that really the case? So when I look inside a widget, I see a viewport representation. So as you can see here, this is a little rectangle which represents any viewport which may become inside our game. And a widget only defines when it is added to a viewport, where are the elements placed inside the viewport. So regarding here, it should be in the upper left corner, and that's it. Here is no connection to a HUD. Only when a HUD receives the call that a widget is visible, this will become visible on your screen. But who tells the HUD that the widget is seen? That is player controller, because the player controller is only the virtual representer of ourself, of our real self. So everything we want to do is everything the player controller wants to do. That is why I put up all input handling when I press a key or click the mouse or drag or drop or something else you might think of. That is why I placed it all in here, because it makes sense to me. Later in my game I want to debug some issues. Maybe there's a bug occurred and I don't quite know where I should start searching for this. When I think of if the problem is regarding to some kind of input handling, I know I should look inside my player controller class, because everything inside my player controller is something about input. Yeah. So when I know there's something which can be affected by my logic inside my character. So for example, if there's something wrong with the health value or some confusing values occurring, I should look inside here. Or if I have some problems with my inventory or something like that, I should look up here. Yeah. So does it make sense to you? When we create a widget, it gives us already the hint where the widget should belong to. When I say create widget, you always ask for owning player, not for owning character, not for owning HUD or something like that. Because the widget is for you, for us. Yes? When I create a menu and I want to say when I press the L key, my menu should be visible. This is called by the player controller. The player controller says, hey, I want to see that menu now. And that is why I create all the widgets inside the player controller and set a reference and set the player controller as well. So I will work with this widget. I tell it I want to see it, I don't want to see it, I want to do some changes in there. So the next thing is the player controller, or in most single player games your player controller will be persistent, which means it will never change during your whole gameplay. So creating the widgets in here would mean your widgets will be persistent as well. So, and every logic I place inside the player controller is persistent. So when I add widgets inside my character, this could be fine when you control a character which never change. These games are quite simple, considering, for example, Super Mario. So where Mario is the player character, you will always possess the whole game. Maybe some Android games or some simple Flash games you might think of could be good enough to handle your game within a character class. So you can place input here if you're not having a separate player controller class. So because this test project is as simple as well, they put input in here too. So, but I wouldn't expect to search for input handling inside a character. That is why in most of my projects I set up a separate player controller and give all the input in there. And here I would simply call some input events which are called from outside of the player character inside the player controller. So when I say Super Mario, I said that you're using only one character, the Mario character. Considering this, during your game it is possible to possess another character, which is Luigi, for example, or Yoshi. This would mean the character is transient, which means we will despawn this one here and all the information we set up for this character here will be lost. And we need to create for the Luigi blueprint the same stuff again. For Luigi we need to create its own widgets again, its own health and so on. So this would mean we need to do some stuff again. We have some kind of redundancy here. So in programming you want to avoid redundancy as most as possible if it isn't needed. For example, if you're working with databases, there's surely some kind of redundancy because you need some backups and so on. But in other cases like this one here, we want to avoid redundancy because we are lazy and we want to save us some time. Another example would be a multiplayer. So if there are more players in your game, this would mean for every player he will have its own HUD, its own widget, and its own character class. Now, assuming they are using all the same character because you prepared one class for the player's character, that's okay, you can do it. And you want to say for each possible player controller, he will have a widget. So what we need to do now here for the owning player, normally you would say something like this: get player controller and the return node inside the owning player. So this means player index null, the first player controller. What is with the second? You need to implement now here somewhere in the game mode or whatever to set up a function which give it on each construction of a character blueprint, on each actual object of a character, you need to give it a player index which represents the actual player controller. You could do that, but when we do it inside the player controller, so, and I say every time when there is a new player controller, which is nothing else but that here, we say create widget. And when there is a new player controller, he will automatically have its own widget on construction. I would advise when you are working with the player controller, always keep in mind that every player controller will have a reference to a HUD, because a second player controller would mean when you play inside of a network, every player controller will have its own viewport. Even in split screen, they are both having its own viewports. So playing with both player controllers on the same viewport, I only remember it when I play Little Fighter, for example. So where player controllers are sharing the same viewport to play the game. So each player controller will have a reference to an own HUD and an own character and own widgets.